What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today I want to talk to you guys about enablers. When you think of enablers, I want you to think of anyone or anything that helps you achieve a certain end state or accomplish your mission. As a Special Forces team, we had a mission to complete, and all the attachments that we had were considered enablers, meaning they were there to enable us to complete our missions. Now, I've had the opportunity to work with some really good fucking enablers. I've also had some fucking shitty ones. Here's an example of a shitty enablers that I had back in 2014. So back in 2014, me and the boys were deployed to Afghanistan. We were working out of Gordez with the commandos. Now, halfway towards the end of that trip, we got word that, hey, Afghanistan is shutting down, and we had to shut down a bunch of different fire bases. So we had to make countless trips from Gordez, where we were, to Shank, where the AOB was. So one day we decided to load up our trucks, and we went on a convoy to Gordez. My driver, he was a generator mechanic. That's very typical because us as Green Berets, we typically like to be behind the gun. So we make our enablers drivers, whether it's a mechanic, a cook, so on and so forth. So the trip from Gordez to Shank was approximately 3 to 4 hours. And on that trip, we had to go through a pretty gnarly, crazy bypass. It's like scaling the side of a fucking mountain, only it went in circles. Like we're literally going around in circle around this mountain, and the higher we got, the less dense the air actually gets, right? So this mechanic is driving, and my captain was the TC. My medic was also in the vehicle, and I'm top gunning. SF term for standing up in the turret behind the 50 cal, right? So I was on top behind the gun. That's all that means. And we're going through this bypass, and it's like we were playing chicken with the side of the mountain. Like we would veer right towards the edge, and then we would veer left. Like we kept swerving back and forth around this fucking mountain. And the entire time, like I'm looking at the side of the mountain thinking, holy shit, we're going over. Like what the fuck's going on? But the third time in, I called my captain. I'm just like, hey, stop the fucking truck. And we stopped the truck, we stopped the convoy, and we talked to the driver just to realize, holy shit, this dude is high as fuck on something. So we snatch him up, put him in the back of the truck. My medic jumps in the driver's seat, and we drive down to Shank. Once we get to Shank, I call that motherfucker over. I'm like, hey man, like, what's going on with you? Because as the 18 Charlie, I was responsible for majority of the enablers, the EOD guy, the mechanics, the cook. Like I was responsible for managing those dudes because one of the secondary job of the 18 Charlie is the base camp manager. So I'm looking at this dude, and I don't know what happened. It's like somebody else just took over. Like I blacked out and I hit this dude, and he just fell to the ground like in shock. Like he couldn't believe that I just fucking laid him out. But I'm thinking to myself, like, you piece of shit, you just literally put the lives of all my teammates in danger because you decided to do whatever before you came out to drive. I share this story with you because I want you to know that, hey, you can have really good enablers, but you can also have some shitty ones, guys. In this segment, guys, I'm going to talk to you about what type of enablers you can get, how you can go about getting them, and also how to train and manage those guys. Let's first talk about the type of enablers that you can actually get. Again, like I mentioned in the intro, guys, enablers simply means somebody that is there to enable the Special Forces team in accomplishing its mission. So now let's talk about a couple of enablers that I personally had attached to my team while we were running and gunning. So for starters, combat controllers, guys, out of the Air Force. They are attachments, they are enablers. Those guys are Special Forces operators for the Air Force, but often they get shopped out to other units so they could perform that task. Those dudes are fucking amazing. Another enabler that you will have the ability to work with is EOD. Now, while I was downrange for that particular deployment, I had a chance to work with Army EOD, and I had a chance to work with Navy EOD. Both did a stellar job, and they kept us out of fucking harm's way countless times. The next group of enablers I had a chance to work with, guys, were 35 mics. Those guys are your intel analysts. They work really close with the Fox, analyzing intel to help the team put together mission packets so we can go execute. The next group of enablers that I had a chance to work with, guys, are mechanics. So we have a shit ton of vehicles. especially if we're on a base camp that we're responsible for running. So you have your track mechanics, your wheel mechanic, you have your generator mechanics, so on and so forth. The last group of enablers that I've had a chance to work with throughout my career, guys, are the cooks. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Air Force cooks and Army cooks. All right, I never worked with any Navy cooks. These are just the guys that I had a chance to work with. Based on the mission and where you're going, your list might look a lot different than mine. Now let's talk about why you'll need an enabler. Once an ODA gets issued a mission, guys, the leadership will get together and they'll plan a PDSS. All that means is, hey, the top 4 or the top 3, we're going to go to XY country and we're going to see what's going on. We're going to talk to the team that's already there. We're going to figure out what they have. We're going to figure out what we need. All they're doing is they're identifying all the gaps. Once they get back from the PDSS, guys, they'll do a quick analysis and they'll figure out where their gaps are. The gaps being all the tasks that the ODA can't complete themselves, and they'll fill out what's called an RFP, a request for personnel. So if I'm going to XY country and it's intel heavy and I got a lot of reports that I need to decipher and I think it's going to overload my Fox, I'll put in a request for an additional 35 mic, an intel analyst. If I'm going to a place where it's IED heavy and I know my 18 Charlie has other things that he needs to do and he's going to need the help, I'll put in a request for an EOD guy, so on and so forth, guys. Once you've identified that, you'll send up that request. Now, typically in teams, it's first come, first serve. So if you had an enabler that you worked with in the past that you really like, the sooner you get your packet in, the sooner you could by name request that guy. So that's typically how it works. You'll do an analysis of the mission and what you currently have, and you'll request additional personnel to fill that gap. Those personnel will come to you in the form of enablers. Now let's talk about who manages those enablers. So while the enablers are attached to you, the team sergeant and the captain, you guys are responsible for them as a whole. However, you don't manage them directly. So within the ODAs, each of those enablers correspond with some of those MOSs. For example, if you have a 25 uniform, he is going to work for the commo guy, for the 18 Echo. If you have a cook, a EOD guy, mechanics, all those guys are going to fall under S4. They're going to work for the 18 Charlie. Your 35 Mike, he's going to work directly for the 18 Fox. So the team sergeant is the overall manager, but the MOSs, they're like the sub-managers that those enablers are going to report to. Now let's talk about training for those enablers. Typically, we get enablers 3 to 4 months out. Once we get those guys, we try to run them through as much range time as possible. Now, I can't speak for most teams, but typically when we have enablers, like I mentioned earlier, we like to make them drivers because we as 18 series want to be behind the gun in case we get into a firefight. So we'll do as much mobility training as possible with those guys, and we'll get them to the range as much as we can before we actually take them on a deployment. Overall, guys, I've had really good experiences with enablers. Those guys are awesome, and I appreciate everything that they do for us and for me whenever I was on the teams. If you guys have any questions or anything to share as it relates to enablers, leave it in the comment section below, guys. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.